Whispers of doubt. The morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Augustine Chapel, casting rainbow patterns across the polished wooden floor. Jonathan Porter adjusted his bow tie for the 5th time, his fingers trembling slightly as they fumbled with the silk fabric. The antique grandfather clock in the corner of the vestibule ticked loudly, each second bringing him closer to the moment he would see Elise walk down the aisle. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad, not marry the love of your life," chuckled Benjamin, his best man and oldest friend since their university days. Jonathan forced a smile. "Just nerves. Normal pre-wedding jitters." But they weren't normal jitters, and they hadn't started until 30 minutes ago when a courier had delivered an envelope addressed to him in unfamiliar handwriting. The letter now burned in his inside pocket like a hot coal. "Mr. Porter?" A young woman with a clipboard appeared at the doorway. "We're ready for you to take your position." Jonathan nodded, drawing a deep breath as Benjamin clapped him on the shoulder. They followed the wedding coordinator through a side door that led to the altar. The chapel was filled with friends and family, their faces a blur as Jonathan took his place, his mind racing with the words he'd read in the letter. "Dear Jonathan, you don't know me, but I am Thomas Harrington, Elise's brother. She believes I died in the accident that took our parents 16 years ago. I survived, but was adopted by a family overseas. I've been searching for her for years, and now I've found her, on her wedding day. I don't want to disrupt her happiness, but I needed someone to know I'm alive. I'll be watching from the back of the church. Please don't tell her today. Let her have this perfect moment. I'll reach out after your honeymoon. Sincerely, Thomas." The organ music began, pulling Jonathan back to the present. He scanned the back rows, wondering which of the unfamiliar faces might be Thomas. His gaze landed on a man about his age with sandy blonde hair, the same shade as Elise's, sitting alone in the last pew. Their eyes met briefly before the man looked away. The wedding party began their procession. First came the flower girls, then the bridesmaids in pale blue dresses, followed by Aunt Vivian, who had raised Elise after the accident. The woman had been both mother and father to Elise, supporting her through college, her medical residency, and now walking her down the aisle in place of the father she'd lost. And then the music changed. The guests rose. And there she was. Elise appeared in the doorway, radiant in her ivory gown, her blonde hair swept up with tiny pearls woven throughout. Jonathan felt his breath catch in his throat. 5 years together, and still the sight of her made his heart race. But today, mixed with the love, was an overwhelming sense of dread. How could he keep this secret from her? How could he not? As Elise approached, her smile luminous behind her veil, Jonathan thought of all they'd shared. Their first meeting at the hospital where she was completing her residency and he was recovering from a rock climbing accident. The late-night conversations about their dreams and fears. The weekend trips to the mountains. The way she always spoke of her lost family with a mix of sadness and reverence. "Who gives this woman to be married?" the minister asked. "I do," said Aunt Vivian, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. She kissed Elise's cheek, then placed her niece's hand in Jonathan's. The ceremony progressed in a blur. Jonathan's responses were automatic, his mind split between the present moment and the weight of his knowledge. From the corner of his eye, he could see the man he suspected was Thomas, watching intently, a mixture of joy and sorrow on his face. Then came the moment for their vows. Elise went first, her words clear and heartfelt as she promised to stand by him through all of life's challenges, to be honest and faithful, to build a future filled with love. The gathered guests smiled and nodded, dabbing at their eyes. And then it was Jonathan's turn. "I, Jonathan, take you, Elise," he began, the words suddenly thick in his throat. The weight of the secret pressed down on him, and he faltered. A hush fell over the congregation. The breaking point, the reception hall buzzed with excitement, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over tables adorned with blue hydrangeas and white roses. But beneath the celebratory atmosphere, currents of tension flowed as guests whispered about the dramatic revelation during the ceremony. Jonathan stood by the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey, watching as Elise and Thomas huddled in a corner. 16 years of absence compressed into hurried conversations. Aunt Vivian hovered nearby, her expression alternating between joy and something darker, something Jonathan couldn't quite place. "That was quite the ceremony," Benjamin said, appearing beside Jonathan. "When you told me you had pre-wedding jitters, I didn't expect that." Jonathan nodded, his eyes still on his new wife and her brother.
"I couldn't lie to her."
"Not at that moment. Of course not," Benjamin agreed. "But you realize this changes everything, right? For Elise, for Aunt Vivian, for your honeymoon plans?" Before Jonathan could respond, the wedding planner signaled that it was time for the first dance. He set down his glass and crossed the room, gently touching Elise's elbow. "Ready for our dance?" Elise turned, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yes, of course." She squeezed Thomas's hand. "We'll talk more later." As they moved to the center of the dance floor, the band began playing At Last. Jonathan drew Elise close, feeling the slight tremor in her body. "Are you all right?" he murmured against her hair. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I feel like I'm dreaming. This morning I was an orphan with no blood relatives, and now you have your brother back," Jonathan finished for her. Elise looked up at him, her expression troubled. "But why didn't he find me sooner?" 16 years, Jonathan. Where has he been all this time?" Jonathan guided her through a gentle turn. "I don't know the full story. The letter only said he was adopted overseas." "Portugal?" Elise said. "He told me he grew up in Lisbon. His adoptive parents never told him he had a sister. He only found out when he accessed his adoption records 3 years ago." Jonathan frowned. 3 years? "And he's only reaching out now?" "He says he's been searching, but all the records showed I had died with our parents." It was only when he hired a private investigator last year that he discovered I had survived. The investigator found articles about a local doctor, me, who had lost her family in a car accident 16 years ago. As they swayed to the music, Jonathan noticed Aunt Vivian watching them from the edge of the dance floor, her conversation with Thomas appearing increasingly heated. "Something's not right with Aunt Vivian," Jonathan observed. "She seems upset." Elise followed his gaze. "She's probably just overwhelmed." Thomas's appearance is a shock to her, too. The song ended and guests applauded. As per tradition, Elise prepared to dance with the closest male relative, a role that would have been filled by the father of the bride. Without discussion, Thomas stepped forward, and Elise moved into her brother's arms. Jonathan returned to his seat at the head table, watching the siblings dance. There was an undeniable resemblance between them. The same graceful movements, the same tilt of the head when they laughed. Yet something nagged at the back of his mind. Aunt Vivian appeared beside him, her face drawn. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "Not here. Meet me in the hotel library in 5 minutes." Before Jonathan could ask questions, she disappeared into the crowd. He glanced back at Elise and Thomas, still dancing, deep in conversation. Making a decision, he slipped away from the reception and found his way to the small library adjacent to the hotel's main lobby. Aunt Vivian was already there, pacing between the bookshelves. When she saw him, she closed the door. "Thomas isn't who he claims to be," she said without preamble. Jonathan stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "Thomas Harrington died in that car accident. I identified his body myself." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "Whoever that man is, he's not Elise's brother." Jonathan sank into a leather armchair. "But the resemblance is remarkable, yes?" Aunt Vivian conceded. "But it's not Thomas. Then who is he? What does he want?" Aunt Vivian's face hardened. "That's what we need to find out before he hurts Elise." "We need to tell her," Jonathan said, standing up. "Right now. Wait." Aunt Vivian placed a restraining hand on his arm. "I confronted him while you were dancing. He's claiming that there was a mix-up at the hospital, that the body I identified wasn't Thomas but another boy who was brought in from the same accident. Is that possible?" Aunt Vivian hesitated. "The bodies were badly injured. The identification was primarily through personal effects and dental records. But I was certain—" "But you could have been wrong," Jonathan pressed. "Perhaps," she admitted reluctantly. "But something about this feels wrong, Jonathan. The timing, the way he's inserted himself into the wedding." The door opened suddenly, and Elise stood there, her face pale with anger. "What's going on?" "Why did you both disappear from my wedding reception?" Jonathan and Aunt Vivian exchanged glances. "Elise," Jonathan began carefully, Aunt Vivian has concerns about Thomas. Elise's eyes narrowed. What kind of concerns? Vivian believes I'm an imposter, came Thomas's voice from behind Elise. He stepped into the library, his expression serious. She thinks I'm lying about who I am. The tension in the room was palpable as Elise looked between her aunt and the man claiming to be her brother. Is this true? She asked Vivian. I identified Thomas's body after the accident, Vivian said firmly. I know what I saw. And yet here I am, Thomas responded. He turned to Elise. I have proof, if you need it. DNA tests, my adoption records, even photos from before the accident that my adoptive parents preserved. Convenient that you mention these now, but didn't bring any of it with you, Vivian said coldly. Thomas met her gaze evenly. I didn't come here planning to reveal myself today. I only wanted to see my sister get married. I was going to approach her properly afterward with all the documentation. Elise's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Stop it, both of you. This is my wedding day, and you're turning it into a nightmare. Elise, Jonathan said softly, moving to her side. We only want to protect you. Protect me? Elise's voice rose. By sneaking away to have secret conversations about my brother? By questioning the one miracle that's happened to me in years? It's not like that, Jonathan tried to explain, but Elise cut him off. Then what is it like? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my new husband and the woman who raised me are conspiring against the only blood relative I have left. Thomas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Elise, they're right to be cautious. It's a fantastic story, I know. If you have doubts, I understand. I don't have doubts, Elise said firmly, covering his hand with hers. I know my own brother. The words landed like a blow to Jonathan's chest. They had been married for less than 3 hours, and already a rift was forming. He looked at Elise at the defiance in her stance as she positioned herself beside Thomas, against him and Aunt Vivian. We should all calm down, he suggested, trying to salvage the situation. This isn't the time or place for this discussion. We have guests waiting. You're right about that, Elise agreed, her voice cool. This is a conversation for another day. She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. And Jonathan? Tonight was supposed to be the happiest night of our lives. But right now, I'm not sure I even want to spend it with you. She walked away, Thomas following after one last apologetic glance at Jonathan. The door closed behind them, leaving Jonathan alone with Aunt Vivian and the weight of unspoken doubts. What have I done? Jonathan whispered, sinking back into the chair. I was trying to be honest, to do the right thing. You did do the right thing, Aunt Vivian assured him, though her voice lacked conviction. But sometimes the right thing comes at a cost. The question now is, how high a price are we willing to pay to uncover the truth? Jonathan stared at the closed door, feeling the distance between himself and Elise growing with each passing second. Their perfect day had been shattered, and he wasn't sure if all the pieces could ever be put back together again. Mended circles. The morning after the wedding dawned with a pale golden light filtering through the hotel suite curtains. Jonathan woke alone, the other side of the bed untouched. After their confrontation in the library, Elise had returned to the reception, performing her duties as a bride with a fixed smile that never reached her eyes. She had danced, cut the cake, and thanked guests with mechanical precision, all while maintaining a careful distance from Jonathan. When the last guests departed, she had quietly informed him that she needed space and would be spending the night in a separate room. Now, as Jonathan stared at the ceiling, the weight of yesterday's events pressed down on him like a physical force. A gentle knock at the door roused him from his thoughts. He pulled on a robe and opened it to find Benjamin standing there, concern etched on his face. You look terrible, his friend observed, stepping inside. I take it things didn't improve after you disappeared from the reception? Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Worse, actually. Elise slept in another room. Benjamin whistled low. That's not how you want to start a marriage. Tell me about it. Jonathan moved to the window, gazing out at the hotel gardens below. But what was I supposed to do? Ignore Vivian's concerns? What if she's right, and this man isn't really Thomas? And what if she's wrong? Benjamin countered, settling into an armchair. What if he is exactly who he claims to be, and you've just alienated your wife from her only living blood relative on her wedding day? The question hung in the air unanswered. Jonathan knew Benjamin was right. They had acted on suspicion alone, with no concrete evidence. "I need to fix this," Jonathan said finally. "But how?" Benjamin leaned forward. "Start by talking to Thomas yourself. No Vivian, no Elise, just you and him." Jonathan considered the suggestion. "And what do I say? Sorry I accused you of being an imposter, but are you really who you say you are?" "Essentially, yes," Benjamin replied with a shrug. "Be straightforward. Tell him you want to believe him for Elise's sake, but you need to understand his story better." Another knock interrupted them. This time, when Jonathan opened the door, Thomas himself stood in the hallway. "May I come in?" he asked, his expression solemn. Jonathan stepped aside, exchanging a meaningful glance with Benjamin, who quickly excused himself, patting Jonathan's shoulder as he left. Thomas and Jonathan faced each other in uncomfortable silence until Thomas spoke. "I owe you an apology. My appearance has caused chaos on what should have been the happiest day of your lives." "That wasn't your intention," Jonathan said cautiously. "No, but it was the result." Thomas paced to the window, his posture tense. "I shouldn't have come. Or at least I should have approached Elise differently." Jonathan studied the man before him. In the morning light, the resemblance to Elise was even more pronounced. The same thoughtful furrow between the brows, the same way of standing with weight shifted slightly to one side. "Why didn't you?" Jonathan asked. "Approach her differently, I mean." Thomas turned, his expression pained. "Fear, mostly. I've spent years searching for her, imagining our reunion. But the closer I got, the more terrified I became that she wouldn't want me in her life. So you sent me the letter instead. A coward's way out, I know." Thomas smiled ruefully. "I thought if you knew first, you could help ease the way." Jonathan moved to the minibar and poured 2 glasses of water. He handed one to Thomas. "Vivian says she identified your body after the accident." Thomas nodded, accepting the water. "There was another boy in the car with us, my friend Daniel. He was spending the weekend with our family. When the accident happened, we were both thrown from the vehicle." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "Daniel and I were similar in build, and we were wearing similar clothes. The bodies were not in good condition. And the dental records?" Jonathan pressed. "An administrative error. Daniel's records were misfiled under my name at our dentist's office." Thomas set his glass down. "I've confirmed all of this. I have documentation from the Portuguese authorities who investigated after my adoptive parents reported finding inconsistencies in my adoption paperwork." "Do you have this documentation with you?" "Some of it, yes." Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded envelope. "Copies of my adoption records translated from Portuguese. Photos of me as a child, before and after the accident. And this." He handed Jonathan a small velvet pouch. Inside was a silver locket, tarnished with age. Jonathan opened it to find a tiny photograph of a young boy and girl, unmistakably Thomas and Elise as children. "Elise has the matching one," Thomas said quietly. "Our parents gave them to us on their last anniversary before the accident. I've kept mine all these years." Jonathan stared at the locket, then at the man before him. The doubt that had clouded his judgment began to dissipate. "I believe you," he said finally. "And I'm sorry for questioning your identity." "Don't be," Thomas replied. "You were protecting Elise. That's what family does." The door opened again, and Elise entered, her eyes red-rimmed from a night of tears. She stopped short when she saw Thomas. "I thought you were alone," she said to Jonathan, her voice still cool. "Thomas came to clear things up," Jonathan explained, crossing the room to her. He held out the locket. "He showed me this." Elise's breath caught as she took the locket. Her hand went automatically to her throat, where her own matching necklace hung beneath her blouse. She pulled it out, comparing the 2 identical pieces. "You kept it," she whispered, looking at Thomas with fresh tears in her eyes. "Of course I did," Thomas replied. "It was my only connection to you." Jonathan watched as understanding dawned on Elise's face. She turned to him, her expression softening. "You believe him now?" "I do," Jonathan confirmed. And I owe you both an apology. I should have trusted your instincts, Elise. And I should have considered your concerns, she admitted. I was so caught up in the miracle of having Thomas back that I couldn't bear to question it. A tentative knock at the door revealed Aunt Vivian, her face drawn and tired. I saw Thomas come in, she explained hesitantly. I needed to. Thomas approached her, documentation in hand. Perhaps we could start over, Aunt Vivian? I understand your skepticism. I'd like to show you what convinced Jonathan. Vivian's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the young man before her. You have his eyes, she said softly. Your father's eyes. I should have seen it immediately. As Thomas and Vivian sat together going through the documents and photographs, Jonathan drew Elise to the far side of the room. I'm sorry about last night, he said, taking her hands in his. I only wanted to protect you. I know, Elise replied, squeezing his fingers. And I'm sorry too. I shouldn't have shut you out. We promised to face everything together, and at the first challenge, I pushed you away. Jonathan tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Not an auspicious start to our marriage. Perhaps not, Elise agreed with a small smile. But think of it this way. We've already had our first major fight. It's all smooth sailing from here. Jonathan laughed, pulling her into an embrace. Over her shoulder, he watched as Aunt Vivian wept openly, clutching Thomas's hands as years of guilt and grief washed away. The truth had been painful, but necessary, a cleansing fire that had forged their family bonds stronger. Later that afternoon, the four of them sat in the hotel's garden, planning the future. Their honeymoon would be postponed. Elise and Jonathan had decided to stay and help Thomas settle in. He would be moving back to the States permanently, having resigned from his position at a Lisbon architectural firm. We have 16 years to make up for, Elise explained, her face alight with happiness as she leaned against Jonathan's shoulder. And a lifetime ahead, Thomas added, raising his glass in a toast. To new beginnings and mended circles. As they clinked glasses, Jonathan reflected on the tumultuous 24 hours that had changed their lives forever. What had begun as a moment of hesitation at the altar had evolved into something profound, a truth that had nearly broken them but ultimately made them whole. You know, he said, addressing Thomas, in a way, I should thank you for that letter. Thomas looked surprised. Even though it caused such chaos? Jonathan smiled, his arm tightening around Elise. It taught us our first lesson as a married couple, that honesty, however difficult, is always the right choice. And that family, whether by blood or by choice, is worth fighting for. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden, the four of them continued talking, laughing, and planning. The wedding might not have gone as expected, but the marriage had found its true foundation, built not on perfect moments, but on the courage to face imperfect ones together. And Jonathan, watching his wife's face glow with newfound joy, knew that he wouldn't have changed a thing about their unconventional beginning. For in the hesitation, in the breaking point, they had discovered a deeper truth, that love is not defined by seamless celebrations, but by how we navigate the unexpected turns that life presents. The weight of unspoken words had been lifted, replaced by the promise of a future where truth, however complicated, would always find its voice. New Horizons. 6 months after the wedding, Jonathan and Elise settled into their renovated Victorian home, with Thomas living in the converted carriage house behind the main property. Spring blossoms dotted the shared garden where they often gathered for Sunday brunches. The early awkwardness between them long dissolved into genuine affection. I still can't believe how much has changed, Elise remarked one evening as she and Jonathan prepared dinner. Thomas and Aunt Vivian were expected in an hour for their weekly family meal. Jonathan smiled, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. From wedding day drama to domestic bliss, it's been quite the journey. The doorbell rang, and Elise wiped her hands to answer it. Instead of Thomas or Vivian, she found a courier with a certified letter. Her face paled as she read the contents. Jonathan, she called, her voice unsteady. You need to see this. The letter was from the Portuguese adoption agency responding to a query about Thomas's records. According to their files, Thomas Harrington's adoption had been processed not by a family in Lisbon as he'd claimed, but by a couple in Madrid, Spain, and they had returned him to the system 3 years later, citing irreconcilable behavioral issues. "This doesn't make sense," Jonathan said, reading the letter twice. "This contradicts everything Thomas told us." "Unless he wasn't telling the truth," Elise whispered, the implications settling like lead in her stomach. Before they could discuss further, Thomas arrived, his usual warm smile freezing when he saw the letter in their hands. "I can explain," he said quietly, his confident demeanor crumbling. "Please, just give me a chance to explain." Truth and reconciliation. The kitchen fell silent as Thomas's story unfolded. He wasn't Elise's brother, that much was true. The real Thomas had indeed died in the accident. But he wasn't a stranger either. "My name is Daniel Miller," he confessed, tears streaming down his face. "I was the friend in the car that day. I survived because your brother pushed me out of the way when another vehicle hit us. He saved my life, and I've carried that debt ever since." Elise stood motionless, processing this revelation. So everything, the resemblance, the locket, the documents, the resemblance is coincidence, enhanced by minor cosmetic procedures, Daniel admitted. The locket was Thomas's. "I took it from him before the ambulance arrived. The documents were altered. But my connection to your family, my gratitude to Thomas, that's all real." "Why?" Jonathan demanded. "Why the elaborate deception?" Daniel looked at Elise, his expression raw with emotion. "Because when I finally found you, I saw how alone you were, how much you yearned for family. I thought I could give you back the brother you lost, repay my debt by becoming him." Aunt Vivian arrived during this confession, her initial shock giving way to a complex understanding. "You weren't wrong about me identifying the wrong body," she said softly. "But it wasn't Thomas who lived, it was you." The room fell silent again, the weight of truth hovering between them. Finally, Elise spoke, her voice surprisingly steady. "I lost my brother twice now, once to death and once to deception. But strangely, I'm grateful." She looked at Daniel, seeing him clearly for the first time. "You didn't need to become Thomas to honor him. Your gratitude, your desire to connect with his family, that would have been enough." In the months that followed, Daniel moved out of the carriage house but remained in their lives. No longer as a brother, but as a friend connected by tragedy and eventually by forgiveness. The family they built wasn't bound by blood or deception, but by a shared understanding that sometimes the most honest connections emerge from the ashes of broken truths. As Jonathan and Elise celebrated their first anniversary, they reflected on the unusual beginning of their marriage, the hesitation, the revelation, the deception, and ultimately, the healing. Their love had been tested in ways they never anticipated, but it had emerged stronger, tempered by adversity and polished by truth. "No more secrets," they promised each other as they raised their glasses under the stars, surrounded by their unconventional family, Aunt Vivian, Daniel, and new friends who had become as close as kin. After all, they had learned that family isn't always who we think it is, but it's always who we choose to love, despite, or perhaps because of, the messy truths that bind us together.